Look, if someone you loved were threatened or even got physically attacked, do you have the right to defend them? And even more so when police are being defunded, when criminals are being released on the streets, do you have a right to protect yourself? Do you have to let things just happen? Do you have to just watch as innocent people get victimized by criminals? Well, look, this is the question currently on trial in New York. This is the case of Jordan Neely. Now look, if you've read most of the news outlets on the left, what you'll hear is this. You hear the 30-year-old black man was a street performer and a Michael Jackson impersonator, that his friends said he was a sweet kid, that he later became homeless and suffered from mental disabilities. If you read news outlets on the right, what you're going to hear is that he was arrested 42 times between 2013 and 2021. In 2015, he was convicted for 4 months after trying to kidnap a 7-year-old girl. He was caught dragging the child down a street in Inwood, Queens. And then in 2021, he was arrested for punching a 67-year-old woman in the face as she left a subway train in New York's East Village. He broke the woman's nose. He fractured her orbital bone. He pled guilty. He was facing 15 months, not in prison, but instead in an alternative-to-incarceration program. He ended up skipping the court date. He had a warrant out for his arrest since February. Look, both sides of Neely's story are true. He was a talented dancer who suffered from mental problems. He became a criminal menace in New York. The justice system was repeatedly letting him off the hook. Now look, even outside of the arrest, people were posting online about personal experiences of being threatened and attacked by Neely. He was known for this. Then on May 1st, Neely was allegedly threatening passengers on a New York subway car. A former U.S. Marine intervened, restrained Neely with a chokehold while 2 other men helped subdue him. Neely lost consciousness. The men placed Neely in a recovery position, but Neely died. Nobody was initially charged in that. Video of that incident really did not show the whole context. It was limited to when Neely had already been restrained. But that video was picked up very quickly by political actors, and they used it to play into the country's race narratives. Democrat Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she wrote on Twitter, actually a couple days later, she said Jordan Neely was murdered. She claimed he was houseless, nice way of saying homeless, and, quote, crying for food in a time when the city is raising rents and stripping services to militarize itself. I haven't heard any of this. While many in power demonize the poor. I've never heard that either. And she said it was disgusting that the man who allegedly killed Neely was not charged. Others on the far left, also aligned with her, also came out to criticize this and claimed it was about race. And they suggested that justice was needed. Although even among Democrats, it should be noted, not everyone was in agreement with that. The political attacks, though, sounded like a dog whistle to radical groups in New York. Just a few dozen protesters, not a major one. They went viral because they jumped on a subway track and forced a Q train to slam on its brakes. And it turned out, folks, those protesters were not some random grassroots protesters. They were with an organization called Voices of Community Activists and Leaders, which has funding, notably, from billionaires, including Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg through his Forward.US education fund, and from radical left billionaire George Soros through his Open Society Foundation. And guess what? It also turned out the radical organization that staged that subway protest had previously teamed up in other protests with the Young Communist League of the Communist Party USA. This outright communist group was also involved in the Neely protests. In fact, they stated in a tweet this. They said, "Thank you to all our comrades who answered the call today. We're just getting started." And they were among the protesters in the city as well. The communist connection to the whole stage protest, that brings this whole incident full circle right back to Representative Ocasio-Cortez being the front runner on calling for charges in the case. Because guess what? Justine Medina, a former aide of AOC, is a member of the executive committee of the New York State Communist Party. And what else? She's co-chair of the New York Young Communist League. That's the same group involved in these protests. So let's dig into this. George Soros finances the campaigns of radical district attorneys letting criminals off the hook. A criminal gets killed by people defending themselves because the city's justice system is failing because of Soros and people like him. A radical Congress member whose political campaign was notably assisted by a media network with funding from Soros comes out and calls for arrests. And then a radical group funded by Soros as well stages a protest while being backed by a communist group tied to that same politician, also calling for arrest. Now look, it seems like there's a whole lot of overlap. Regardless of all of this, regardless really of this whole Soros above and below strategy that we're seeing at play, former Marine Daniel Penny was arrested. And he was arrested specifically for manslaughter charges. He holds that he acted in self-defense. Look, is this really about crime then? Is this really about justice? Or is it about something else? Why was he not arrested initially? Well, it's not clear. But what we can say is that the narratives are not lining up. And why not? Well, aside from everything else, many politicians who called for Penny's arrest were simultaneously criticizing the use of justice, while calling for this guy to be persecuted, to be prosecuted, right? While they were doing that, they were also calling against these types of things. They did this while calling for Penny to be sent to prison. Others were more direct. Others suggested this may not even be about manslaughter or about justice or about mental health. You know what they're saying? They're saying this is about race. New York City Mayor Eric Adams flip-flopped on this point, actually. First, he appeared on CNN, in fact, and he criticized AOC for claiming that Penny murdered Neely. Let me show you.
Well, both the Congresswoman and the controller is a citywide leader. And I don't think that's very responsible at the time where we're still investigating the situation.
Then what happened? Well, then Adams followed up with that with a race-based narrative on the case. Now look, for conservatives, this is not about race. Instead, it's about whether or not you're allowed to defend yourself. The case has become a symbol of what's wrong with defunding the police and whether people are being selectively prosecuted not on crime, but based on the color of their skin. And when people like Adams make it about race, which he is doing, other people start wondering if the case would be treated differently if race wasn't an issue. And that's partly why people like Kid Rock, for example, he's a rock star, he donated $5,000 to Penny's defense fund. It's why even politicians like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are getting on board to fundraise for Daniel Penny's defense. And it's also why people are now bringing up the idea of self-defense. Like Al Sharpton, for example, he's stating that if Penny had not been charged, he said it would encourage others to become vigilantes. And this is where many cities in the United States are now at. The common view, at least among conservatives, is this: police have been made unable to do their jobs. The courts appear to have a swinging door. Violent maniacs like Neely, look at his charges, are allowed to attack people, harass people, and generally cause chaos. Nobody will protect you. And so what are your options? Look, even if you see other people being attacked or harassed, should you do anything to help them? Should you allow them to be attacked? Or do you face going to prison if you step in to help? Back in 2021, we watched in shock at what took place in Pennsylvania. Passengers on a train in Philadelphia, in the area of that, they sat and watched as a woman was raped on a train. Nobody stepped forward to help her. They listened to her cries and they allowed it to happen. And that raised a real serious question of what we're becoming as a society if people don't step up and do something when they see evil taking place. Look, in the natural world, self-defense is written into the DNA of life. Even bugs have the means to defend themselves. Nearly every creature on earth has been given by God a means to defend itself, whether with claws or with teeth or with stingers or with other means. Humans create tools like swords and guns. We use those to defend ourselves. And this held true throughout all of human history. The right to self-defense is the right to life. And the right to guard life is one of the main pillars of law.